Part One, Section 1 of The Maine Woods by Henry David Thoreau. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. The Maine Woods by Henry David Thoreau. Part 1, Ktaadn, Section 1. On the 31st of August, 1846, I left Concord in Massachusetts for Bangor in the backwoods of Maine, by way of the railroad and steamboat, intending to accompany a relative of mine engaged in the lumber trade in Bangor, as far as a dam on the west branch of the Penobscot, in which property he was interested. From this place, which is about 100 miles by the river above Bangor, 30 miles from the Houlton military road, and 5 miles beyond the last log hut, I proposed to make excursions to Mount Ktaadn, the second highest mountain in New England, about 30 miles distant, and to some of the lakes of the Penobscot, either alone or with such company as I might pick up there. It is unusual to find a camp so far in the woods at that season, when lumbering operations have ceased, and I was glad to avail myself of the circumstance of a gang of men being employed there at that time in repairing the injuries caused by the great freshet in the spring. The mountain may be approached more easily and directly on horseback and on foot from the northeast side, by the Aroostook road and the Passataquoyak River, but in that case you see much less of the wilderness, none of the glorious river and lake scenery, and have no experience of the batteau and the boatman's life. I was fortunate also in the season of the year, for in the summer myriads of black flies, mosquitoes, and midges, or, as the Indians call them, no-see-ums, make traveling in the woods almost impossible. But now their reign is nearly over. Ktaadn, whose name is an Indian word signifying highest land, was first ascended by white men in 1804. It was visited by Professor J. W. Bailey of West Point in 1836, by Dr. Charles T. Jackson, the state geologist, in 1837, and by two young men from Boston in 1845. All these have given accounts of their expeditions. Since I was there, 2 or 3 other parties have made the excursion and told their stories. Besides these, very few, even among backwoodsmen and hunters, have ever climbed it, and it will be a long time before the tide of fashionable travel sets that way. The mountainous region of the State of Maine stretches from near the White Mountains, northeasterly 160 miles to the head of the Aroostook River, and is about 60 miles wide. The wild or unsettled portion is far more extensive, so that some hours only of travel in this direction will carry the curious to the verge of a primitive forest more interesting, perhaps, on all accounts, than they would reach by going 1,000 miles westward. The next forenoon, Tuesday, September 1st, I started with my companion in a buggy from Bangor for up river, expecting to be overtaken the next day night at Mattawamkeag Point, some 60 miles off, by 2 more Bangorians, who had decided to join us in a trip to the mountain. We had each a knapsack or bag filled with such clothing and articles as were indispensable, and my companion carried his gun. Within a dozen miles of Bangor we passed through the villages of Stillwater and Oldtown, built at the falls of the Penobscot, which furnish the principal power by which the Maine woods are converted into lumber. The mills are built directly over and across the river. Here is a close jam, a hard rub at all seasons, and then the once green tree, long since white, I need not say as the driven snow, but as a driven log, becomes lumber merely. Here your inch, your 2, and your 3-inch stuff begin to be, and Mr. Sawyer marks off those spaces which decide the destiny of so many prostrate forests. Through this steel riddle, more or less coarse, is the arrowy Maine forest, from Ktaadn and Chesuncook and the headwaters of the St. John, relentlessly sifted, till it comes out boards, clapboards, laths, and shingles, such as the wind can take, still, perchance, to be slit and slit again, till men get a size that will suit. Think how stood the white pine tree on the shore of Chesuncook, its branches soughing with the 4 winds, and every individual needle trembling in the sunlight. Think how it stands with it now, sold perchance to the New England Friction Match Company. There were in 1837, as I read, 250 sawmills on the Penobscot and its tributaries above Bangor, the greater part of them in this immediate neighborhood, and they sawed 200 millions of feet of boards annually. To this is to be added the lumber of the Kennebec, Androscoggin, Saco, Passamaquoddy, and other streams. No wonder that we hear so often of vessels which are becalmed off our coast being surrounded a week at a time by floating lumber from the Maine woods. The mission of men there seems to be like so many busy demons to drive the forest all out of the country, from every solitary beaver swamp and mountain side, as soon as possible. At Oldtown we walked into a batteau manufactory. The making of batteaux is quite a business here for the supply of the Penobscot River. We examined some on the stocks. They are light and shapely vessels, calculated for rapid and rocky streams, and to be carried over long portages on men's shoulders, from 20 to 30 feet long, and only 4 or 5½ wide, sharp at both ends like a canoe, though broadest forward on the bottom, and reaching 7 or 8 feet over the water, in order that they may slip over rocks as gently as possible. They are made very slight, only 2 boards to a side, commonly secured to a few light maple or other hardwood knees, but inward are of the clearest and widest white pine stuff, of which there is a great waste on account of their form, for the bottom is left perfectly flat, not only from side to side, but from end to end. Sometimes they become hogging, even after long use, and the boatmen then turn them over and straighten them by a weight at each end. They told us that one wore out in 2 years, or often in a single trip on the rocks, and sold for from $14 to $16. There was something refreshing and wildly musical to my ears in the very name of the white man's canoe, reminding me of Charlevoix and Canadian voyageurs. The batteau is a sort of mongrel between the canoe and the boat, a fur trader's boat. The ferry here took us past the Indian Island. As we left the shore, I observed a short, shabby, washerwoman looking Indian, they commonly have the woebegone look of the girl that cried for spilt milk, just from up river, land on the Oldtown side near a grocery, and drawing up his canoe, take out a bundle of skins in one hand and an empty keg or half barrel in the other, and scramble up the bank with them. This picture will do to put before the Indian's history, that is, the history of his extinction. In 1837 there were 362 souls left of this tribe. The island seemed deserted to day, yet I observed some new houses among the weather-stained ones, as if the tribe had still a design upon life, but generally they have a very shabby, forlorn, and cheerless look, being all backside and woodshed, not homesteads, even Indian homesteads, but instead of home or abroadsteads, for their life is domi aut militiae, at home or at war, or now rather venatus, that is, a hunting, and most of the latter. The church is the only trim-looking building, but that is not Abenaki, that was Rome's doings. Good Canadian, it may be, but it is poor Indian. These were once a powerful tribe. Politics are all the rage with them now. I even thought that a row of wigwams, with a dance of powwows and a prisoner tortured at the stake, would be more respectable than this. We landed at Milford and rowed along on the east side of the Penobscot, having a more or less constant view of the river, and the Indian islands in it, for they retain all the islands as far up as Nicketow at the mouth of the East Branch. They are generally well timbered, and are said to be better soil than the neighboring shores. The river seemed shallow and rocky, and interrupted by rapids, rippling and gleaming in the sun. We paused a moment to see a fish hawk dive for a fish down straight as an arrow from a great height, but he missed his prey this time. It was the Holton Road on which we were now traveling, over which some troops were marched once towards Mars Hill, though not to Mars Field, as it proved. It is the main, almost the only road in these parts, as straight and well made, and kept in as good repair as almost any you will find anywhere. Everywhere we saw signs of the great freshet, this house standing awry, and that where it was not founded, but where it was found, at any rate, the next day, and that other with a water-logged look, as if it were still airing and drying its basement, and logs with everybody's marks upon them, and sometimes the marks of their having served as bridges, strewn along the road. We crossed the Sunkaza, a summery Indian name, the Olemon, the Passadumkeag, and other streams, which made a greater show on the map than they now did on the road. At Passadumkeag we found anything but what the name implies, earnest politicians, to wit, white ones, I mean, on the alert to know how the election was likely to go, men who talked rapidly, with subdued voice, and a sort of factitious earnestness you could not help believing, hardly waiting for an introduction, one on each side of your buggy, endeavoring to say much in little, for they see you hold the whip impatiently, but always saying little in much. Caucuses they have had, it seems, and caucuses they are to have again, victory and defeat. Somebody may be elected, somebody may not. One man, a total stranger, who stood by our carriage in the dusk, actually frightened the horse with his asseverations, growing more solemnly positive as there was less in him to be positive about. So Passadumkeag did not look on the map. At sundown, leaving the river road a while for shortness, we went by way of Enfield, where we stopped for the night. This, like most of the localities bearing names on this road, was a place to name which, in the midst of the unnamed and unincorporated wilderness, was to make a distinction without a difference, it seemed to me. Here, however, I noticed quite an orchard of healthy and well-grown apple trees in a bearing state, it being the oldest settler's house in this region, but all natural fruit and comparatively worthless for want of a grafter. And so it is generally lower down the river. It would be a good speculation, as well as a favor conferred on the settlers, for a Massachusetts boy to go down there with a trunk full of choice scions and his grafting apparatus in the spring. The next morning we drove along through a high and hilly country, in view of Cold Stream Pond, a beautiful lake 4 or 5 miles long, and came into the Houlton Road again, here called the Military Road, at Lincoln, 45 miles from Bangor, where there is quite a village for this country, the principal one above Oldtown. Learning that there were several wigwams here, on one of the Indian islands, we left our horse and wagon and walked through the forest 1/2 mile to the river, to procure a guide to the mountain. It was not till after considerable search that we discovered their habitations, small huts in a retired place, where the scenery was unusually soft and beautiful, and the shore skirted with pleasant meadows and graceful elms. We paddled ourselves across to the island side in a canoe, which we found on the shore. Near where we landed sat an Indian girl, 10 or 12 years old, on a rock in the water, in the sun, washing, and humming or moaning a song meanwhile. It was an aboriginal strain. A salmon spear, made wholly of wood, lay on the shore, such as they might have used before white men came. It had an elastic piece of wood fastened to one side of its point, which slipped over and closed upon the fish, somewhat like the contrivance for holding a bucket at the end of a well pole. As we walked up to the nearest house, we were met by a sally of a dozen wolfish-looking dogs, which may have been lineal descendants from the ancient Indian dogs, which the first voyageurs describe as their wolves. I suppose they were. The occupant soon appeared with a long pole in his hand, with which he beat off the dogs while he parleyed with us, a stalwart but dull and greasy-looking fellow, who told us in his sluggish way, in answer to our questions, as if it were the first serious business he had to do that day, that there were Indians going up river, he and one other to day before noon. And who was the other? Louis Neptune, who lives in the next house. Well, let us go over and see Louis together. The same doggish reception, and Louis Neptune makes his appearance, a small, wiry man with puckered and wrinkled face, yet he seemed the chief man of the two, the same, as I remembered, who had accompanied Jackson to the mountain in '37. The same questions were put to Louis, and the same information obtained while the other Indians stood by. It appeared that they were going to start by noon with 2 canoes to go up to Chesuncook to hunt moose, to be gone a month. Well, Louis, suppose you get to the Point, to the 5 Islands, just below Mattawamkeag, to camp. We walk on up the West Branch to morrow, 4 of us, and wait for you at the dam, or this side. You overtake us to morrow or next day, and take us into your canoes. We stop for you, you stop for us. We pay you for your trouble." "Yes," replied Louis, "maybe you carry some provision for all, some pork, some bread, and so pay." He said, "Me sure get some moose," and when I asked if he thought Pomola would let us go up, he answered that we must plant 1 bottle of rum on the top. He had planted good many, and when he looked again, the rum was all gone. He had been up 2 or 3 times. He had planted letter, English, German, French, etc. These men were slightly clad in shirt and pantaloons, like laborers with us in warm weather. They did not invite us into their houses, but met us outside. So we left the Indians, thinking ourselves lucky to have secured such guides and companions. There were very few houses along the road, yet they did not altogether fail, as if the law by which men are dispersed over the globe were a very stringent one, and not to be resisted with impunity or for slight reasons. There were even the germs of 1 or 2 villages just beginning to expand. The beauty of the road itself was remarkable. The various evergreens, many of which are rare with us, delicate and beautiful specimens of the larch, arbor vitæ, ball spruce, and fir balsam, from a few inches to many feet in height, lined its sides, in some places like a long front yard, springing up from the smooth grass plots which uninterruptedly border it, and are made fertile by its wash, while it was but a step on either hand to the grim, untrodden wilderness, whose tangled labyrinth of living, fallen, and decaying trees only the deer and moose, the bear and wolf can easily penetrate. More perfect specimens than any front yard plot can show grew there to grace the passage of the Houlton teams. End of Part 1, Section 1, recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.